Hi, I'm Alicia Butler Pierre, founder and CEO of Equilibria Incorporated. Equilibria is an operations management consulting firm, and we specialize in increasing the capacity of fast-growing small businesses so that they scale with less pain. I'm originally from Louisiana, and the reason I mention that is because growing up, I've definitely had my share of surviving different natural disasters, namely hurricanes. So I know what it is to go without running water, electricity, the whole nine. My background is also in chemical engineering, and when I worked in New Orleans, I always used to marvel at the fact that after a natural disaster occurred, the manufacturing companies were up and running in little to no time following the disaster, whereas some businesses never got up and running ever again. They simply had to close their doors. Why was that? What was the difference? Well, the difference oftentimes boiled down to who had an immunity to these natural disasters versus those who did not. And there were certain things that manufacturing and production companies had in place that these other companies didn't. So today I'm going to share with you 3 tools that you can use to build your business's immunity so that you can survive most types of disasters. The first tool that I'd like to share with you for building your business's immunity is called the Pre-Mortem. And it's actually based on an article that was written by Gary Klein back in 2007 in the Harvard Business Review. And the pre-mortem is actually derived from the medical community. So if you look at the post-mortem process that is used to autopsy a person once that person has passed away, the doctor is usually trying to determine the cause of death and goes through a series of different examination type processes and procedures to determine that cause of death. Well, we could actually apply those same principles to determining why a business fails, or for lack of a better word, why does a business die? But what Gary actually suggested is that rather than doing a post-mortem once a business has already failed, why don't we do a pre-mortem and actually figure out right here in the current state what could go wrong, or instead of asking what might go wrong, you should instead ask what did go wrong. In other words, he's suggesting that try to think of a scenario where your business actually has failed and then work backwards to determine the causes of that failure. And that is known as the pre-mortem. Now, if we actually think about it, our businesses are susceptible to all types of unforeseen events that we don't necessarily have control over. Everything from water and electricity outages. A disgruntled employee can show up at your place of business and cause a lot of havoc and damage. It could be a terrorist attack that's the cause for a business's failure. Different types of theft, viruses, unexpected deaths of key employees, or what we often term as essential employees. It could be a security breach. And as we are dealing with right now, it could actually be the result of a pandemic. Now, although there are all different types of disasters and emergencies and areas and points of crisis, we can't think of every worst case scenario for our business, but we can at least get the ball rolling on determining what our contingency plans can be in our companies so that we can make adjustments moving forward and aren't so reactionary when these events actually do occur. Now, let's imagine for a moment as we go through the rest of this talk that we are dealing with the ABC Lemonade Company. And the ABC Lemonade Company is a thriving small business, and it consists of 6 key departments that you see here on the screen in front of you: human resources, marketing, operations, technology, accounting, and legal compliance. Now, again, remember, the purpose of the pre-mortem is to imagine that your company has already failed, and you're going to work backwards to figure out to figure out what actually led to that failure. The pre-mortem actually looks at your entire company holistically, okay? And it kicks off with a brainstorming session one of the first things that you want to do in performing or creating a pre-mortem is to gather all of the managers and other top leaders from each of these departments to participate in a brainstorming session to understand the reasons that could have led to a particular, to the reason why your business actually failed. When you get inside of this brainstorming session, I recommend using little note cards, especially if you are able to meet in person. And right now, I know we do have a social distancing policy that is enforced pretty much throughout the country and for most of the world right now. So it may not be possible to actually conduct this brainstorming exercise in person, but you certainly can conduct it virtually as well. The point is you want to have representation from every single group or main department within your company. Doesn't matter if you're just a 2 or 3 person operation, even if you are a solopreneur, you can still go through this exercise. But you want to start brainstorming all of the different reasons why your business can actually fail, or why it did fail, excuse me. And this is just representative of what a note card exercise might look like. You would have these different reasons written on individual note cards. And then as people are brainstorming, it's going to give all of you the opportunity to hear from different perspectives, which can actually lead to a holistic view of your company. And it'll give you the benefit of hearing reasons from other people why a business has failed. And it gives you maybe a different perspective that you may not have had before, because you may not necessarily have as much interaction with people from other departments other than your own. Now, once you've recorded everything, all of these different reasons onto note cards, or if you're doing this digitally, you have everything typed up on the screen, if you all are using some type of a screen sharing tool, the next thing you do is start to group all of these different reasons by department. And the reason it's helpful to do this is because the result of this pre-mortem is actually going to eventually feed into your overall disaster recovery and business continuity plan, which is the third tool that I'm actually going to talk to you about. Really quickly, again, if you aren't able to meet in person and have a brainstorming session like this, I definitely recommend you use a digital program like Trello. The reason I like Trello so much is because it actually has this digital note card feature. So if you are using a screen sharing tool like, let's say, loom.com or zoom.com, yes, Loom and Zoom, 2 different companies, but you can actually use their screen sharing capabilities while working within Trello and having these different digital note cards and being able to move them about the screen. You can also color code them by department as well. It just makes it a little bit easier for people to follow. So once you've categorized your reasons by department, you then want to use a pre-mortem template that I will provide to you in the description below. You want to use this template and by department or by functional area, actually start listing out all of those reasons that have been grouped into these note cards. And you'll notice here the last column is for a mitigation plan. That mitigation plan is still at this point at a very high level, but it's just to let you all know that you're starting to actually give shape to what the response would be in the event that you all face these different failure points. Now here in the example, if we look at operations, we see that potential failure points, the lemon supplier is unable to deliver. It could be because of that particular supplier may have a shortage of employees at that moment. It could be that the pandemic has unfortunately taken many of their employees or has prevented many of their employees from being able to show up for work. And if their drivers aren't showing up, these lemons cannot be delivered to our ABC Lemonade Company. There's also a nationwide social distancing policy, so that also can be a cause or a reason for why the business can fail from an operations standpoint. In that mitigation plan column, you and your team would actually start to think at a very high level, how could we work around this? Or how could we eliminate or prevent something from like this completely derailing us from an operations standpoint? Remember, the outcome is that the mitigation plans that you come up with here in this pre-mortem exercise will eventually feed into your overall disaster recovery plan. And it's thinking about those things that actually are within your control. To sum up what takes place in the pre-mortem, the people that you need to get involved is executive management. You also, again, want to get those top leaders that represent each of the different departments within your company. Have someone serve as a facilitator during this brainstorming session. You also want to make sure you have a designated note taker, the person who's going to capture all of these different reasons. A quick summary of the process that we just talked through. Again, corral the key people within your organization that should participate in this exercise. Brainstorm the different reasons why the business has failed. Again, the pre-mortem is at a very high level, macro level. It's looking at the entire business and not just one particular department. Categorize those reasons and then discuss high-level mitigation. And lastly, distribute these results by department to each of those department managers, because this information, we're going to take an even deeper dive into the second tool, which is the FMEA. Now, from a pre-mortem perspective, the tools that you have at your disposal are the pre-mortem template that is available to you in the link in the description box below. Again, make sure you have some type of a workspace, whether that be virtual or a larger room where you can accommodate everyone, and also some type of whiteboarding tool, whether that be virtual or physical, like we talked about Trello. Another whiteboarding tool is called the Think Smart Whiteboard app. So that's another tool that you can consider. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the second tool that I'd like to share with you. The FMEA is an invaluable tool in my opinion. And as a process consultant, I find myself using this particular tool more than anything else in my day-to-day work with my clients. It actually stands for Failure Modes and Effects Analysis. And what that means is it's a proactive way of defining and identifying any potential process and or system failures and literally trying to understand the impact or the effect of those different issues on the process itself. So unlike the pre-mortem, where you're actually looking at the overall company, or maybe if you're working on a project, at the overall project, the FMEA is actually conducted at a more granular level. It's conducted at the process level. And as you can see here in this cartoon in front of you, there's one of the characters saying that he would like to play the devil's advocate. And a lot of times when I'm explaining this tool to people, that's exactly what I tell them. And what I mean when I say that you're actually playing devil's advocate with a particular process is that you intentionally want to make sure that you poke holes to determine where the weak points and areas of vulnerability may exist in your process. Now, again, this is conducted at the process level. So remember this exercise that we did with the pre-mortem, where you identified all of these different reasons and you started to categorize those reasons and assign them to a particular department. Well, let's continue with that particular exercise and take it a step further. So again, we have our reasons that we have assigned to the operations department. And then within the operations department, we have, let's say, 3 key processes: production, packaging, and distribution. When those department managers leave that pre-mortem exercise, they're going to then work with people within their department to figure out, of all of the reasons that were assigned during that pre-mortem exercise, which ones go with the processes that are in place within a particular department. So for purposes of this exercise, we're going to say that reasons A1 and A2 that were identified during the pre-mortem actually have to do with the distribution process. Now, looking at the distribution process itself, we have it represented as a flow chart here. consider that each of these steps in that flowchart are actually numbered. And the reason you want to make sure you number your process steps is because once you actually get to your FMEA spreadsheet, and you'll see what that looks like in the template that is provided in the description box below this video. But this is just a snapshot of what the FMEA spreadsheet looks like. You want to break out your process steps. So we're going to take a look at step 3 of that flowchart, which is confirm delivery. We then want to take that step and walk it through all of the other columns on this spreadsheet. So figuring out where are all of the potential places where this step can actually fail. So one failure that we have listed here is that the customer did not receive the lemonade on schedule. Then we want to look at the actual impact, the causes. Are there any current controls in place? And what that means is there anything that you have in place right now, today, to actually mitigate the possibility of that happening? And if not, you want to make sure that you state that no, there's nothing in place right now. The RPN column, that stands for risk priority number. It is a scoring system that you'll actually see when you look at the template itself. It's based on the severity, the occurrence, and your ability to be able to detect when that problem occurs. Now, depending on the actual score that's calculated, that will let you know how to prioritize your different risks, because obviously you can't address everything all at the same time, but you can use this scoring system to help you determine which risk you want to be able to address first. And then the last column is obviously if you identify these potential failures, you definitely want to make sure that you state what a potential corrective action could be. And then once you do all of that for the process, you want to make sure again that you embed those different reasons that were identified during the pre-mortem. Make sure those things are actually addressed at a more granular level in your FMEA. Depending on the complexity of your process and how many people have to get involved and give their input and possibly even approval, I would say it could take you anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks to complete this exercise. You may be able to do it in a much shorter time period, especially if you're considering something like the COVID-19 pandemic and you have to figure out some contingency plans as quickly as possible. Now, to wrap up, the people that you want to get involved when you're putting together the FMEA, you definitely want to have that department manager or that frontline leadership that some people refer to people at that level in their companies. Whoever actually owns that process, you want to make sure you get that person involved as well as the people who actually do the work that's involved in that process, whether you call them operators, technicians, whatever you may call those people. Again, a quick recap of how you conduct an FMEA. You want to review the process, determine all of the failure points, assess some of the root causes, score it using that risk priority number, start brainstorming solutions, and then you actually want to improve the process based on the corrective action that you and your team come up with, and then recalculate that RPN score. Make sure that score continues to go down. Hopefully, the goal is to eventually eliminate it and just have a score of 0. As far as tools is concerned, again, you will have a link to an FMEA template that will come complete with instructions that's available below this video in the description box. I also recommend, especially during times of a pandemic where we have to practice social distancing, make sure you leverage real-time collaborative spreadsheet tools like Google Sheets. I know a lot of times if you upload a spreadsheet into a tool like Dropbox or SharePoint, you can also have multiple people working on that document at the same time, and it's capturing everyone's feedback. Now that we know how the pre-mortem works, we have the FMEA, let's now talk about how we combine those two things to create our third tool for building your business's immunity. And that third tool is the Disaster Recovery and Business Continuity Plan. Now, despite what you may think or what you may have heard, they are not the same thing. disaster recovery and business continuity actually describe two different concepts, but they can definitely be combined into the same plan. The business continuity plan is all about how you are going to keep your business up and running during the time of a disaster or a crisis. For example, with the COVID-19 pandemic that we're dealing with right now, one way to ensure your business's continuity is to determine how many of your employees can actually work remotely, and implementing and instituting different tools to help facilitate that. Disaster recovery, on the other hand, is all about your company's ability to restore data and any other system that's used to run your business should that infrastructure get damaged or destroyed in some way, shape, form, or fashion. So, for example, if there is a fire, if there is theft, if there is a security breach, cybersecurity attack, or even a malicious virus, how quickly can you actually recover that data and get all of your operational systems that are digital up and running as quickly as possible? Just to give some more context to this, business continuity is all about workflow continuation. And a way to measure your business continuity plan's success is by looking at the extent or the degree to how much downtime you actually have with your operations. In other words, as a result of COVID-19, are your operations completely down right now? Has it completely paralyzed your company's ability to operate? Or can you say that you're at least up and running at about maybe 50% capacity? Another measure is the time that it takes to resume normal operating capacity. We've been hearing this phrase so much now, everyone's referring to the new normal. Well, how long will it take you to get back to operating at 100% capacity, keeping in mind that the way that you may have conducted business before may look drastically different from the way that you will have to operate your business currently in the midst of the pandemic. The other thing, when it comes to disaster recovery, it's all about your ability to restore information. And two measures of this is the degree to which you can recover all of your data. If there is a power outage, if there's a cybersecurity attack of some sort, there's malware that has been installed on your company's network or even locally to your laptop, how quickly can you recover all of that data? Do you even have data backup plans in place? So this is what the differences are between disaster recovery and business continuity. Now, what does that plan actually look like? Well, obviously, as with everything else that we've discussed, that depends. It depends on the complexity of your company. It depends, obviously, on the size of your organization. But because we're talking specifically about small businesses, this is what I recommend. I'm all about being able to interconnect all of these different tools that we've been talking about. So let's start with the pre-mortem. Remember, we had that high-level mitigation plan that we came up with as a result of trying to figure out how to address some of the different reasons for the company failing. That was the very first exercise that we talked about. Then we talked about the FMEA, where we're looking at a more granular process level and really determining those corrective actions that need to take place. You want to take the information from that pre-mortem combined with the information from your FMEA, and that is a great starting point and foundation for creating the content for your company's disaster recovery and business continuity plan. Because again, it's all about being able to think of these worst case scenarios and literally outlining step by step, all of the actions that should be taken to fully recover and fully get business operations up and running. Here are some of the key elements, because every disaster recovery and business continuity plan obviously will look different depending on the industry that your company is in, depending on whether or not you are actually manufacturing or producing a tangible product or you are delivering a service. But here are key elements that I think you should have in any disaster recovery and business continuity plan. And that is, I've broken them up into three main sections: intellectual as well as physical property, risk management, and communication. When it comes to your intellectual and physical property, we definitely have to talk about what's going to happen to the physical space that you are in, as well as emergency evacuation plans, records management. So many people miss this, and it's important to actually recovering the information that is needed to keep your business functioning at full capacity. Risk management, again, we want to talk about data redundancy and recovery. By data redundancy, that means what type of remote data backup services do you have in place? Do you have anything like that in place? If not, you definitely want to make sure that you do. Also, systems recovery. By system, we mean a series of printers, equipment, things that are networked together that, again, form the basis for your company's day-to-day operations. Obviously, operations redundancy and recovery, financial recovery, as well as legal compliance and the impact on company operations. And lastly, third section is communication, making sure you have emergency contact information for all of your team members, all of your staff, and not just employees. I would also throw in vendors, suppliers, your entire supply chain. I also think it's wise to have an emergency contact call tree. So in what order will certain people be contacted to disseminate important information throughout your company? Also, coming up with an internal communication plan. One of the quickest, most surefire ways of making sure people will panic is to not communicate with them. So in my opinion, I think you would want to always err on the side of caution. You can't ever communicate too much during the times of crisis, but you also want to make sure that you have an external communication plan in place as well. So that involves communications via social media, as well as if you are very plugged into certain magazines, local newspapers, etc. Now, keep in mind, these are very generic elements, but elements that I think are key and critical to every type of business. Now, let's just kind of quickly bring all of this together for our disaster recovery and business continuity plan. Timing, again, there is a range here, depending on how large, how complex, how many different offices you may have, how many different locations you may be in. But I would say, especially considering the seriousness of this pandemic that we're facing right now, and the fact that you want to kind of hit the ground running as quickly as possible, don't make this a huge, overly complicated, bulky document that no one is going to read. Make sure it's very easy to follow. People can get to the information that they're looking for very quickly. I would say don't spend more than a month trying to put this together, especially considering the fact that people need information as quickly as possible. So the people that should be involved in putting together this disaster recovery and business continuity plan, definitely top line managers. You as the CEO or the owner of your company, you absolutely must be involved in this process. I know a lot of times as CEOs, we don't like getting bogged down into details, but this is one of those moments where you just simply cannot ignore the details. Obviously the department managers, because the department managers have played such a key role in putting together some of these different elements that go into creating this disaster recovery and business continuity plan. As far as the process itself, once those department managers have gathered all of the information from the FMEA exercise as well as the pre-mortem, I would gather all of them together again and literally start piecing together the information that they've provided within their department, almost as though it's like assembling a puzzle. You have all of these different pieces and elements from these different areas of your company. Start fitting them together so that you can launch this plan company-wide. And as soon as you do that, I recommend also scheduling some type of a town hall meeting where you can field questions from your staff. And then moving forward, set up a review schedule. It might be unrealistic to think that you'll look at this monthly, but maybe you can look at it quarterly, maybe every 6 months. I don't know if annual is maybe too far out a time of frequently reviewing your plan, but you have to do what works best for you and your company. As far as tools are concerned, there will be a disaster recovery and business continuity template that's part of your business's immunity kit that will be provided in the link below in the description. I also recommend, if you haven't researched or looked into this yet, definitely invest in remote data backup services. You may be using the cloud right now, which is great, but if you still store things onto hard drives, definitely look into remote data backup services. So many people now know what Zoom is. Virtual conferencing is certainly an option, considering the social distancing policies that we have to adhere to right now around the world. Generators, in the event that there is a loss of electricity. Trailers. Some people, if their physical space has been destroyed during a disaster, a lot of times they are able to continue their business operations by deploying the use of trailers. Also look into VPNs. So many people now are having their staff work remotely. And again, you want to make sure that your data is not compromised, especially if you are using networks. You don't want that information to be easily breached. So certainly look into VPNs. And then another thing that I would suggest, especially from a records management standpoint, physical records in particular, try to invest in fireproof and waterproof equipment as much as possible. Now, with these three things, these three tools, you have your Pre-Mortem, your FMEA, and your disaster recovery and business continuity plan. Those three things make up your business's immunity kit. Now, if you still aren't convinced as to why it's so important to build your business's immunity using these three tools, take a look at this statistic on this infographic from FEMA. And if you're listening or watching this, FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Agency here in America. It says that roughly 40 to 60% of small businesses never reopen their doors following a disaster. But there is hope, because you can beat that statistic. Another thing that I appreciate about this infographic from FEMA is that they talk about the importance of having a continuity plan as well as a disaster recovery plan. So you're already way ahead of the curve in terms of other small business owners, who aren't privy to this information. Now check out this other statistic in the upper right-hand corner. It says, following a disaster, 90% of smaller companies fail within a year unless they can resume operations within 5 days. Meanwhile, 20% of larger companies spend over 10 days per month on their continuity plans. Again, that's probably not realistic for us as small business owners, but you get the point. Having a plan is so key. Building your business's immunity with these three tools is going to be so vital to making sure you keep operations afloat. There is no reason at all why you should be going out of business during the time of a crisis. If anything, especially with COVID-19, with many of us being under self-quarantine, social distancing, not necessarily social isolation, but we can actually take advantage of those moments where we're basically forced to work from home and use those periods as time for self-reflection as well as introspection. And you'll be amazed at the creativity that will start just flowing through you. And through that creativity, that's where your best ideas and solutions are going to come from. If you found this information helpful, I have even more resources available for you. One is through my podcast. It's called the Business Infrastructure Podcast. I recently recorded an episode number 90, where I talk about how I was able to rebound after a very devastating flood in my hometown of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I basically had to take off 2 years from my business without income, dealing with the aftermath of that flood, but kept the business going. Didn't have any income, and that's a whole nother story. You'll hear that in the podcast. But the point is, I was able to resume operations. And when you click on the link that will be available in the description below, you'll be able to actually access even more resources that I point out in that particular podcast episode. Another resource that I want to share with you is my book. It's called Behind the Facade: How to Structure Company Operations for Sustainable Success. It is literally the first published book in the world to talk about business infrastructure for fast-growing small companies. I detail step by step how to implement my business infrastructure model. It definitely can help you during this COVID-19 pandemic crisis. In particular, pay attention to chapters 4 and 5. The book is available on Amazon in both hard copy as well as ebook format. But chapters 4 and 5 specifically tell the stories of two different businesses, one that had to recover their data after being attacked by a malicious virus, and the other tells the story of a business that was able to recover after Hurricane Katrina. Let's definitely connect. I don't want our interaction to stop here at this point because I'm sure you have lots of questions. There's so much more to say about all of these tools. Unfortunately, we just can't cover every single thing there is to say about each of these tools. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me and ask me any questions that you may have as you download these templates and start figuring out how to customize it and tweak it specific to your company's needs. Wow, I know that was a lot of information to process and digest, but thank you so much for giving me an audience. And thank you to Marie and Contrera for extending an invitation to participate in this Entrepreneurship and Leadership in COVID Summit. I really appreciate it. Take care, everybody. Stay safe, be well, and keep operating smoothly.